Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm really glad that you're here. Today's session is called The Art of Difficult Conversations: How Leaders Can Master Tough Talks. And it's designed for leaders who want to get better at one of the hardest and most essential parts of the job, which is talking about the things that matter when it's uncomfortable to do so. So, whether you're navigating performance challenges, team tension, feedback, or alignment issues, these moments often make or break trust. And unfortunately, most leaders haven't been given the tools to do it well. So, we'll explore what's really happening underneath these moments from a psychological, somatic, and trauma informed perspective. And then I'll walk you through a practical framework that we used in our Catalyst Leadership signature leadership development training called The Art of Conversations. Now, by the end, you'll not only have a new lens, but a roadmap for approaching these conversations with more clarity, confidence, and care. All right. Now, before we get too much further into things, let me introduce myself. My name's Scott Arrieta. I'm the CEO of Unity and Company, and we're the strategic partners that market leading brands rely on to unify their leadership teams and transform their cultures. Now, every month we host events like these for executives across a variety of industries, and the goal here really is to connect senior leaders and help them to share insights that spark conversation and an exchange of ideas that you can bring back to your organizations. So be sure to follow us on LinkedIn or sign up to our mailing list at unityandcompany.com if you'd like an invitation for future events. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into today's session. Okay, let's start with an obvious but often unspoken truth that most leaders avoid difficult conversations. In fact, research from Crucial Learning has found that 70% of employees avoid difficult conversations at work, often for months or even years. And when they do happen, they're often rushed, reactive, or overly diplomatic. And so they fail to surface what actually needs to be said. And the cost of that avoidance is high. Teams stay stuck in misalignment. Frustrations fester and build resentment, psychological safety erodes, and performance suffers not just for individuals, but for the whole organization. So, as author Susan Scott says in her book, Fierce Conversations, we avoid difficult conversations not because we lack the skill, but because we fear the outcome. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of creating conflict, fear of damaging relationships. But what if the problem isn't just a lack of skill? What if there's something deeper going on that's keeping us from speaking the truth? So that's where we're going to go next. All right, so let's go ahead and dig into the real question here. Why are difficult conversations so difficult? I mean, it's easy to assume that it's just about the topic. Maybe it's a sensitive topic, it's high stakes, or it's emotionally charged. But most of the time, the discomfort actually goes a lot deeper than that. What actually makes these conversations hard is what's happening inside of us. The fear of being rejected or misunderstood, the fear of damaging our reputation or relationships, the fear of making things worse instead of making things better. And those fears, they don't just live in our heads, they live in our bodies. So when we anticipate discomfort or conflict, our nervous system often kicks into a threat response. And this is the same system that evolved to keep us alive. So instead of staying calm and curious, we fight by becoming defensive or argumentative. We flee by avoiding the conversation altogether. We freeze by going blank or shutting down. Or we fawn by over apologizing, appeasing, or downplaying our own needs. And here's the thing: this isn't just about communication style, this is about survival wiring. As Bessel van der Kolk writes in The Body Keeps Score, the body keeps the score. If the memory of trauma is encoded in the viscera, in heartbreaking and gut wrenching sensations, then the mind needs to befriend the body. In other words, if we don't recognize the psychological responses driving our discomfort, we'll keep blaming the situation or the other person rather than learning how to self regulate and stay grounded in the moment. So, difficult conversations aren't just hard because of what's being said, they're hard because of what gets activated in us when we try to say it. This is where trauma informed leadership becomes a game changer. So, let's go on to that next. All right, so now we understand that difficult conversations trigger more than just logic. They trigger survival responses. And now that we understand that, we can start to see why most conventional leadership advice falls short when it pertains to difficult conversations. Because telling someone to just have the hard conversation or lean into conflict, I mean, that might sound good in theory. But in practice, if a leader is dysregulated or if the person that they're talking to doesn't feel safe, then no amount of script memorization is going to help. And that's why we introduced this concept. trauma informed leadership. Now, let me define that clearly because this isn't about therapy. This is about understanding that everyone, and I mean, yes, everyone, carries invisible experiences into the workplace. So, as Dr. Gabor Mate puts it, trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. And so, in a trauma informed leadership context, this means recognizing that emotional reactions are often protective patterns, not personality flaws. And knowing that dysregulation in a conversation isn't always about the current moment, it's often about past wounds being reactivated. And leading in that way, that creates psychological safety, not just procedural clarity. It also means understanding our own patterns. Where do we shut down? Where do we get triggered? What does our body do when we anticipate tension? This doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means creating the conditions for truth to be told and for hard conversations to result in healing, not harm. So here's the shift. We stop seeing these moments as problems to fix, and we start seeing them as opportunities to model grounded, safe, and skillful leadership. And that starts with regulation, yours first. Next, we'll talk about the body's role and how to stay centered when the conversation gets heated. All right, here's something that most leadership books leave out. You can't communicate what you don't embody. That means your presence, your energy, your tone, your body language, it often lands before your words ever do. And in high stakes conversations, the most important skill isn't what you say, it's how regulated you are when you say it. So when your nervous system is activated, when your heart rate spikes, your breath shortens, your jaw clenches, you're no longer operating from a place of leadership. You're operating from a threat response. And once those physical sensations kick in, your mind begins to associate thoughts and beliefs with that sensation, which then bleeds out into your words and actions. So even if your words sound calm, people can feel what's underneath. And that's why somatic awareness matters. Somatic means of the body, it means tuning into your internal state so you can lead from a place of grounded clarity instead of reactivity. So, Deb Dana, one of the leading voices on polyvagal theory, writes a dysregulated nervous system can make connection and co regulation nearly impossible. So, if you want to lead hard conversations well, here's your first move: track your body. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now in my body? Am I breathing deeply or shallowly? Am I bracing, collapsing, or staying open? If you're dysregulated, pause, ground yourself, come back to center before moving forward because regulation is contagious. A regulated leader can regulate a room. This is why trauma informed leadership isn't soft, it's deeply embodied. And it's what allows you to hold space for tough conversations without defaulting to fear, control, or appeasement. So now that we've laid the groundwork, let me introduce a model that helps bring this to life step by step. Okay, so now that we've unpacked what makes these conversations so challenging and the role that our nervous system and past experiences play, let's shift from insight to action. So at Unity and Company, we teach a model to leaders called the art of conversation, and it's a practical trauma-informed approach to navigating any leadership conversation. It's especially powerful in moments of tension, misalignment, or change, when what you say and how you say it can have an outsized impact on the outcome. And the model is simple, but it's deeply effective. So it has 5 phases: opening, curiosity, recommendation, agreement, and follow up. And here's why this matters. Most leaders rush in with a point of view, but conversations aren't meant to be presentations. They're co created, which means that they require presence, listening, and structure. This framework gives you that structure, and it's designed to be iterative and flexible, not robotic. In fact, the most important phase in the whole model is curiosity. And curiosity takes up about 80% of the conversation. Because when somebody feels deeply heard, they're far more likely to open up to new ideas. Each phase of this model builds psychological safety, clarity, and shared ownership. 3 of the most essential ingredients for any effective leadership exchange. So let's walk through each phase, starting with how you begin. All right, now every conversation starts somewhere, but most of us don't think intentionally about how we begin the conversations. We rush in, we hint at what we want before we start, we drop feedback mid meeting, and then we wonder why people get defensive or shut down. Now, the opening phase is about doing the opposite. It's where we set the tone, establish rapport, clarify the purpose of the conversation. This is your moment to create psychological safety, not with perfection, but with intention. And here's what that might sound like. Hey, thanks for making the time today. I wanted to talk about something that I think is important for how we work together. Now, this isn't about blame. It's about trying to move forward with clarity and trust. Notice what's happening here. You're framing the conversation clearly, signaling the partnership and not power. You're lowering the nervous system threat level. As the leader, your job is to calibrate the room, and that starts with your body. And we've already covered that, but it's reinforced with your words. So, a strong opening makes the rest of the conversation so much smoother. A weak or ambiguous one invites confusion and resistance. So before you jump into your agenda, ask yourself, have I created the conditions for openness? If not, then you need to pause, lead with clarity, then move to curiosity, because that's where the real work begins. All right, now if the opening sets the tone, then curiosity builds the bridge. And this is the heart of the conversation, and where most leaders either rush or retreat. But here's the truth: the better that you listen, the better you lead. Curiosity isn't just about asking questions, it's about creating a space where the other person feels safe enough to share what's really going on. And in trauma informed leadership, we say people will only bring forward as much truth as they feel safe to reveal. And that means your job in this phase is to ask open ended questions, reflect back what you're hearing, stay grounded even when what they say surprises or frustrates you. So, some example prompts. Can you help me understand how you saw that situation? What do you need in order to feel supported moving forward? What's most important to you here? Notice how you're not interrogating, you're exploring. And while you can use closed ended questions to clarify details, the goal is to listen to understand, not listen and just wait for your turn to respond. So, this is also where your somatic awareness matters. If your body is bracing, your questions won't feel open. If your tone is clipped, your curiosity will feel conditional. And if your mind is already racing to a rebuttal, you're not truly in this phase. You've jumped ahead. So Carl Rogers, the father of human-centered therapy, once said, when someone really hears you without passing judgment, without trying to take responsibility for you, it feels damn good. And that's what this phase creates. And here's the best part: by staying here longer than feels comfortable, you actually shorten the rest of the conversation, because once someone feels heard, they're far more open to collaboration, feedback, and resolution. So, next, we'll explore what happens once you've gathered enough insight to make a thoughtful recommendation. All right. Now, the curiosity phase is the hardest phase to master for some people because they don't know what questions to ask. And in reality, questions tend to flow quite naturally and intuitively if you can get your conversation partner talking and engaging with you in the topic at hand. But the best way to start the curiosity phase is with an open ended question. Then you can use closed ended questions to drill down and refine your understanding. So let's just review the difference between open ended questions and closed ended questions. So for open-ended questions, they start with who, what, when, where, and why. They really encourage somebody to start talking and to tell you in detail about their situation. So for example, how are you doing with that assignment? Now, it encourages your partner to participate, and it's best used at the beginning of a conversation to paint a broad picture, a broad overview of what's happening. Now, closed ended questions, by contrast, start with can, did, will, or have. So, did you finish that assignment? It encourages short and precise responses, and they're best used to drill down on details or check for alignment and buy in after you've gotten an initial lay of the land in terms of the conversation. All right. Now, once you've spent real time in the curiosity phase, you've listened, you've reflected, you've clarified, and you've created safety. Now you've earned the right to move into recommendation. But this isn't about giving a lecture. It's about offering a next step that's grounded in everything that they just shared. So instead of saying, here's what we need to do, what you say instead is, based off of what you said, here's what I'd recommend. That small shift signals that I heard you. I'm building with you, not at you. And I'm proposing a path forward, not dictating it. And this is where leadership and partnership meet. Your recommendation should reflect their core concerns or values, be as collaborative as possible, stay open to being shaped or refined, because this isn't a one shot offer. If they resist, don't escalate. Loop back to curiosity. Ask, okay, well, what's not landing for you? Or is there something that I'm missing? How would you improve this idea? The goal here is not to be right, it's to be in the right relationship. This phase is also where leaders must check their egos. Are you recommending what's best for the person, the team, and the work? Or are you trying to prove a point? The more your recommendation feels like a natural outgrowth of the curiosity phase, then the more likely it is to land and to last. And once it does, we're ready to solidify next steps in the agreement phase. All right, so once a recommendation has been shared and refined, then the natural next step is to make sure that both sides are aligned and to close the conversation in a way that builds clarity and trust. So the goal here is to get clear and then to get out gracefully. So in the agreement piece, your job is to confirm what was decided, who's doing what, and by when. So you might say, hey, just to recap, we've agreed that you'll take the lead on X and I'll support with Y, and we'll check in again next Friday. Does that sound right? This is where we avoid vague handshakes or assumed understanding, because most misalignment happens after the conversation when nothing was actually written down or followed through. Next, we move to the final close. And what that means is acknowledging the effort that it took to have this conversation, reinforcing your shared commitment, and expressing appreciation or support. So here's what that might sound like. Hey, thanks for being open today. I know conversations like this aren't always easy, and I really appreciate your honesty. Or, I'm glad we had this conversation. It helps us to move forward stronger. This close creates emotional completion. It allows people to walk away feeling heard, respected, and clear. And when you close well, you don't just end a conversation, you build a relationship that can handle more conversations in the future. But we're not quite done yet, because the best leaders don't just have good conversations, they follow up. So let's talk about what happens after the meeting. Okay, so you had the conversation. You named what needed to be named. You aligned on next steps. You even closed it with care. So you're done, right? Well, not quite. Because the most overlooked phase of any tough conversation is this one: follow up. Here's the truth: even a great conversation can unravel if no one checks in afterwards. Follow up creates accountability, trust, and a signal that you're not just checking a box, you're in it with them. So this doesn't have to be formal. It can be as simple as, hey, just wanted to check in on how things are going since our conversation. Is everything unfolding the way that we had hoped? Is there anything that we need to adjust? That kind of touch point does a couple of things. It reinforces that you meant what you said. It gives them space to raise anything that they didn't have the words for in the moment. And it creates a feedback loop for your own leadership. So, research from Harvard Business Review found that follow up conversations increase perceived fairness and improve long term outcomes in performance management and feedback settings. But more than that, it tells the person, you matter. Not just the task, not just the output, you matter. And in trauma informed leadership, that is the cornerstone of psychological safety. So don't stop at the calendar invite, circle back, keep the door open, let the conversation evolve, because trust isn't built in a moment, it happens in what happens after that moment. All right, so we've covered a lot. We've explored why difficult conversations feel hard, not just intellectually, but emotionally and somatically. We've introduced trauma informed leadership as a new lens, one that recognizes people's lived experiences and nervous system patterns. And we've walked through a concrete five-phase framework: opening, curiosity, recommendation, agreement, and follow up. But here's the bigger truth: this isn't just a communication strategy, it's a leadership practice, because the most powerful leaders aren't the ones who have all the answers. They're the ones who can regulate themselves under pressure, create safety while speaking truth, stay curious longer than feels comfortable, and hold others with both accountability and care. This model doesn't ask you to be perfect, it asks you to be present, to be human, and to model a different way of engaging, one that your team, your peers, and your organization desperately need. Because what breaks trust isn't disengagement, it's a disconnection. And what rebuilds it is the willingness to go there, even when it's uncomfortable, maybe especially when it's uncomfortable. So let this be more than a slide deck. Let it be a shift in how you lead. Okay, so let's bring this home. The best way to get better at difficult conversations isn't to read more books or memorize more scripts. It's to practice, to engage, to choose one conversation that you've been avoiding and show up to do it differently. So here's your prompt. What conversation are you avoiding right now? It might be a performance issue, a moment of misalignment, a lingering tension that hasn't been named. Now ask yourself, what would it look like to approach that conversation using this model? How could you open with care? What would it look like to truly get curious? What recommendation might you offer, grounded in what you've learned? And what would agreement sound like? And most importantly, how will you follow up? This is where leadership gets real, not in the theory, but in the application. In the moment when you say, this might be uncomfortable, but it matters more to me that we're aligned than that I stay safe. That's the shift. That's the work. And you don't have to do it alone. We're here to help. Okay, so as we close, I want to leave you with this. Mastering difficult conversations isn't about being fearless. It's about being resourced, grounded, and willing to meet discomfort with clarity and compassion. It's about leading in a way that creates more truth, not more fear, more alignment, not more avoidance. And the good news is you now have a roadmap, one that's trauma informed, relationship centered, and rooted in real leadership practice. So, if you want to take this deeper, here are a few resources that we recommend. So, if you'd like a one-page reference guide for the Art of Conversations model, just shoot us an email and we'll be happy to send it your way. info@unityandcompany.com. If you are the only person to attend from your organization and you wish that you weren't, just reach out to us and we'll be happy to do an encore presentation for others in your organization. If something today that we talked about sparked your interest and you're interested in understanding how we could potentially partner together in the future, we'd also love to spend some time connecting with you so that we can understand more about your needs and share more about our capabilities. Additionally, here are a few of our favorite books to help you on the journey of mastering the art of conversations and trauma-informed leadership. So we mentioned The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott, The Polyvagal Theory and Therapy by Deb Dana, and Radical Candor by Kim Scott, which is a favorite. All right. So if your team or organization wants to go deeper into this work, we'd love to partner with you, whether through training, coaching, or facilitated practice. So reach out to us at info@unityandcompany.com and we can get the conversation started. And as a final thought, every tough conversation that you lean into with presence and skill becomes a doorway to more trust, to better performance, to a culture where truth can be told and people can thrive. Thanks for showing up today. Now go have the conversations that matter the most.